Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the very much anticipated occasion, which is the official launch of the LMI report for the Canadian electricity industry. My name is Sandy Sosodash, and I'm the project manager for the LMI, and it's a very, very exciting day, and a lot has been happening leading up to this occasion. I'd like to welcome you to everyone who is here in person and all those who are joining us virtually as well. Firstly, I would like to acknowledge that we have come together on the traditional territory of the Anishinaabe, including the Mississaugas of the Credits, the Haudenosaunee and Huron-Wendat territory. We are thankful to have the opportunity to live and work on this land and give our respect to its first inhabitants, while we always continue to remember the lives of the lost children and respecting the survivors of residential schools, their families, and their communities. On the safety side, I'd like to notify everyone that we do have 2 exits in the front there, but perhaps the most advisable way to exit, should we need to in an emergency, is through the stairway and gather at the reception area that we came through earlier on. I would like to extend a very special thank you to our gracious hosts, OPG, Ontario Power Generation, for hosting us here today. And without further ado, I'd like to invite Michelle Brannigan, who's the CEO of EHRC, Electricity Human Resources Canada, to provide today's opening remarks. Michelle.
Thank you, Sandy. So welcome, everybody. We are really pleased to be hosting you today, both in Toronto, across Canada, and internationally via webcast, as we officially launch our flagship report, Electricity in Demand, Labour Market Insights 2023-2028, coming to you soon. I'd like to echo my appreciation, of course, for Ontario Power Generation's support today as our title sponsor and throughout the years. Their dedication to the workforce, their sharing of best practices, and their support for the work of EHRC has been tremendous. I also want to thank and recognise ATCO for their sponsorship of the report, and Employment and Social Development Canada as well too. This study has been funded in part by the Government of Canada through their sectoral Workforce Solutions program. Now, as you know, Canada's electricity and the renewable energy sector is expanding to meet the growing demand for power. That is largely driven by economic and population growth, technological innovations, public expectations, environmental imperatives, consumer preferences, and competitive dynamics. Canada's commitment to decarbonize the economy through greater electrification and to achieve net zero status by 2050 will accentuate that trend even in the medium term. As such, our sector right now needs a comprehensive human resources strategy so that it can achieve those carbon reduction objectives and its organizations can continue to provide value to their customers on a profitable basis. Without suitably skilled workers, even the best business plans and ideas cannot be successfully implemented. It is equally important that the sector's employees have the opportunity to perform meaningful work that provides them with dignity, a sense of purpose, and a decent quality of life, something that we all strive for. Now, developing this supply of skilled and experienced workers for both today and tomorrow is critical to ensuring Canada's long-term electricity stability, powering how we live, work, connect, and play. As our name signifies, EHRC is Canada's national voice for HR priorities in Canada's electricity sector. Our vision is to build a world-class electricity workforce. We do this working with you, our partners, and we are the only organization that is dedicated to bringing together industry, academia, organized labor, and government to collectively work together to tackle current issues, to inspire and recognize excellence in this industry, and to apply a business lens to workforce planning as we shape our industry's future and help our planet, which literally right now needs all the help that she can get. We are living in a moment in history that is defined by the need for more carbon neutral energy sources and environmentally sustainable businesses. Studies have determined that Canada's electrification requirements will be at least 2 times our current generation capacity. So if you just think about that, taking everything that we have now and doubling it, this is a massive undertaking. We are going to need to work together to get it done. As you'll hear during the presentation, a more innovative, holistic, and forward-thinking approach is going to be required. It is not business as usual. We need to recruit, we need to develop, we need to retain the people who are going to innovate, build, and manage our grid. Among other things, EHRC's LMI report articulates the rationale and the elements of a proposed HR strategy for us all to work together in the electricity sector. I kind of get the dull intro this morning because I can't give anything away. My economists are the stars of the show today, and really looking forward to seeing them up here. But I wanted to share what I think is a startling number, because we all know what a tight labour market it has been in Canada over the last couple of years. But by 2035, Canada's worker to retiree ratio is expected to be 2 to 1. And just to put that into context, just 50 years ago, which is not that long ago, it was 7 to 1. So we're going from 7 to 1 to 2 to 1. So that demographic reality means that the sector will need to attract new workers in the coming years just to sustain, let alone grow and meet those electrification needs and those decarbonization requirements for our workforce. So, I really see that this report is a call to action. It's a call to action with practical recommendations. So as you listen to today's presentation, as you listen to the story, the data, I ask you to consider how you will join us on our vision and our mission, which is building that world-class electricity workforce that is safety-focused, that is innovative, and that is inclusive. So thank you. Thank you for being here in person today. Thank you to those who are dialing in. I would now like to invite Cynthia to come to the podium. Cynthia Domjanjic is the Senior Vice President of HR of Ontario Power Generation, and I'm going to hand it over to you. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you. Thank you all for being here. So we're very excited to be here for the launch of EHRC's Labour Market Report. We've been anticipating it, so it's going to be the best read this year, I'm sure, for myself. OPG is so proud to be the title sponsor. In this critical time for the electricity industry, it's important for all of us to take stock of where we are right now and look to what's coming in the years ahead. As you know, we're facing some massive changes on an unprecedented scale in the not too distant future. A potential doubling or tripling of electricity demand, a move towards electrification of industry, homes, and transportation, and a wide-scale effort to decarbonize our economies, to fight climate change, and secure a better tomorrow for our children. These are all very big challenges, and collectively, we as an industry will be asked to do a lot of the heavy lifting. From new clean generation to new transmission and distribution, there is a lot of work ahead of us. This Labour Market Report will inform us. It will give us a view of the challenges and opportunities to help us prepare for the future and ensure we are ready and equipped to support this once-in-a-century energy transition. The main challenge, of course, is ensuring we have enough qualified, trained, and skilled workers to meet our future needs. Our workforce faces an aging demographic with many experienced and knowledgeable people due to retire. Our challenge as an industry will be to ensure knowledge continuity and succession planning while producing tech-savvy workers who can lead through innovation in the 21st century. In Ontario alone, as we face a doubling of demand in electricity, we know we will require a significant increase in existing workforce to build all the necessary projects. In the 2023 to 2032 period, almost 500,000 trades will be needed to support construction. Today, with the ongoing nuclear refurbishments, we're already managing with a shortage of skilled trades, and many industries are now competing for a smaller pool of workers. Across Canada, the story is the same, with many jurisdictions facing the same challenge to attract skilled and qualified workers. So how do we as an industry tackle this challenge? Collaboration and coordination are key, as is tapping into the diversity of the labor market. We need to work together as an industry, as well as with government, education stakeholders, and Indigenous communities to identify the skills and new knowledge that we will need to build up that capacity at the earliest stages. For OPG's part, we are taking steps now to address the challenge for the industry by building up our workforce pipeline with a focus on building a diverse and inclusive workforce. We must tap into the diversity of our labor market. We have an ongoing funding partnership with Durham College and Ontario Tech University, with investments totaling more than $15 million in both institutions since 2005. And we're building up Indigenous capacity through the Indigenous Opportunities Network, ION, which has placed more than 100 Indigenous workers in various roles across OPG and the sector. We're also putting a major focus on attracting youth and promoting the electricity sector as an exciting and important industry to be in. Through our Electrify Your Career campaign, we're working to attract the best and brightest who are passionate about tackling climate change through electrification by working for OPG and the sector. And we have been engaged with EHRC's Empowering Futures program to provide opportunities for students to gain real-life work experience with us. Because the youth of today will be the doers, change makers, and leaders who help take this sector through the next phase of its history. They will be the ones who ultimately execute the major projects we're planning now to ensure we can successfully electrify life in one generation. That's why we're in schools, to help open young eyes to the possibilities of a career in the trades, in the nuclear industry, and the wider and more broader energy sector. We have to continue to think outside the box to reach a wider, younger, diverse audience and foster the skill sets that we're going to need in the future. The electricity sector isn't what it was 50 years ago. The world and technology are constantly changing, whether it be artificial intelligence, advancements in energy efficiency, or the use of drones and agile robots for diagnostics. Innovations are changing the way we generate, deliver, and use electricity. As a sector, we need to continue to embrace innovation and an innovative mindset to find efficiencies and always stay relevant. And we need to continue to foster emerging skill sets that are ready to handle whatever the 21st century will throw at us. We hope this report, which includes occupational specific projects for the next 5 years and total workforce requirements anticipated out to 2035 and 2050, will help Canada better understand the plan for the future. The task at hand is great, but the opportunities are greater. By working together and leveraging our learnings and expertise, our industry and our people will be able to meet the greatest challenge of our lifetime, to build a brighter future for all Canadians. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Cynthia, for those words. It is a very exciting time for the industry and the many developments, especially in the nuclear industry. Now, before we get to the presentation, I know that Sheldon and Yulia are quite anxious to step forward, but we are very lucky and privileged, and we're always excited to hear from the next generation of skilled labor in the industry. And today we have Sing Kang, who is a data analyst at OPG, who's going to say a few words before we get started with the presentation. Thank you, Sing.
Hello, everyone. So looking back on my journey, I remember the excitement that filled my home when I received that offer letter from Toronto Hydro for an internship position as I was doing my degree in chemical engineering. During my internship in the maintenance department, I was really enthusiastic to showcase my potential. And despite being assigned a rather repetitive task, I saw it as an opportunity to enhance the existing process. And so with a bit of programming and an introduction to a new software, I managed to automate the work order creation process, leaving a significant impact even within that brief period. Post-graduation, I reached out to Toronto Hydro again, expressing my interest in joining them full-time. To my delight, a manager that I assisted during my internship called me back and offered me a position to start the following week. My journey within Toronto Hydro has marked my exploration and learning as I transitioned through various departments, finally finding my interest piqued by the nuclear sector. This newfound interest led me into a position as a nuclear operator in training at OPG, where I joined a cohort of other fellow operators. The camaraderie and shared excitement to learn as a class of operators made this such a memorable experience. However, eager to utilize my skills in computers and programming, I transitioned to a role of a data analyst for the Construction Center of Excellence at OPG. Here, I forged lasting friendships with colleagues who continue to inspire and encourage me. As I reflect, I realize that each opportunity, no matter big or small, has played a crucial role in shaping my journey. It has led me to my current interest in computer security, an area I have actively pursued through self-study, formal education, and practical application in my current role. As I delve into new interests, I have kept an eye out for emerging opportunities. Just yesterday, I completed a cybersecurity specialist interview for OPG, a new challenge that I'm eager to embrace. Through every role I've had, from working at a coffee shop to a data analyst, I've gained valuable insights. And I believe that hiring managers can't help but be influenced by candidates' passion and eagerness to succeed. It's a kind of infectious energy. My guiding principles have been to always remain curious, stand firm in my beliefs, and take pride in my work. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Singh. Thank you for highlighting the different and diverse opportunities that are very available for young people in the industry. Now to the main act of the event, I would like to invite our group of economists to present the results of the LMI, and I'm going to introduce them very quickly. We have Stephen Tobin, who's the lead economist at LabourX. He is joining us from, from France. And Sheldon Pollin, who's the economist, an economist at EHRC. Yulia Narovny, who is also an economist at EHRC. Please note that we will be taking questions afterwards. There will be a mic going around for the people who are here in person, and we will have questions being noted for our online participants as well, and we will entertain all of those. I will invite the economists to come through and start their presentation. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Sandiswa. It's a pleasure to be here with you this afternoon, and we're very happy to present the findings of our major LMI study. As Sandiswa noted, the three of us, myself, Julie, and Stephen, will be presenting different parts of the presentation. I'll begin just giving a brief overview of the chronology of the presentation. We'll start off talking about the objectives of the project, the sequence, the elements therein. We'll give an overview of the electricity and renewable sector. We'll talk briefly about recent trends and developments in the sector that are having significant implications for the labor force. We'll talk about our labor market outlook, of course, and talk about the analytical framework that we employed and the forecasting methodology that we utilized to come up with our results. And then, based on the research and analysis, we have a very targeted HR strategy that we're proposing to address some of the issues and problematic areas that we've identified in the course of the research. And as Sandisa indicated, we'll be happy to take any questions that any of you have with regards to the research or any of our ongoing work in the LMI realm. Okay, so our major objective throughout the entire process is to provide value and utility to all our stakeholders, whether they're governments, policymakers, regulators, academic institutions, employers, students, anybody that has a stake in the sector and cares about climate change and environmental challenges that Canada is facing. Just to give an example of how we think our research can provide value, in the case of academic institutions, it's quite common prior to developing and offering a program to potential applicants that a labor market analysis be done to see whether the significant expenditure in equipment, facilities, and instructors is going to be justified by the labor market, whether graduates of any proposed program are going to have favorable employment outcomes when they graduate and in subsequent years. So we feel that our research can be quite useful in that regard, as well as the other stakeholders that we try to target our research to. Obviously, we want to position and better equip HR practitioners to develop effective strategies for dealing with areas such as attraction, recruitment, retention, and succession, and just help them be more strategic. And any of the research and data that we provide is done ultimately with that in mind. Obviously, we want to enable stakeholders to collaborate more effectively amongst themselves, and we'll be talking about that subsequently in the presentation. A key component of the research is that we'll be talking about is the requirement to develop academic training and programs that really reflect the evolving needs of the labor force. So we believe and hope that the research and analysis that we've developed in the course of our efforts is really going to help academic institutions develop programs that really create entry-level workers that really are ready on job one to contribute substantially to the organizations that they work for. And ultimately, we want to help all these different stakeholders mitigate their business risk. And if we can do that, we believe that we're providing value and we derive a tremendous sense of satisfaction from that. Just to give you an overview of the sequence of the study, the elements therein, we started out with an environmental scan. It was very important for us to understand really all the issues that directly affect the electricity sector as well as its labor market. So we focused on macroeconomic developments, geopolitical developments, technological innovations, remuneration, bilateral trade in electricity between Canada and the US. All these things really help guide the research and put us in a stronger position to really come out with meaningful, useful research. We were able to do 17 key informant interviews with people selected from across the sector. They represented different segments, such as utilities, academic institutions, renewable energy firms, service providers, electricity system operators, and we got an enormous amount of information from them on how they view the sector, some of the constraints that they're challenged with, their expectations about how the industry will evolve, their views with respect to Canada's regulatory commitments. So in its totality, it was quite useful and really helped guide the research process and help us prioritize our efforts. We also formed a steering committee specifically for this project, and we had excellent representation from across the sector, and we were guided and directed by our steering committee members to help us tailor the research and address some of the issues that they specifically identified with respect to data gaps and other issues that were of paramount importance to them. So the contribution that they made was quite instructive and really useful in the entire process. As Julia will be discussing subsequently, we did a survey of employers and educators from across Canada, and we had a very favorable response rate, and we were able to derive a lot of useful information about various areas of these companies' organizations, that some of the issues that they're grappling with. And it gave us a good understanding of their views, expectations, and concerns with respect to what's happening currently and what's happening during the projection period, 5 years and beyond. We used multiple sources in the course of our research. We used official data from Stats Canada. We used, as I mentioned, we had the key informant interviews, we had the surveys, and in its totality, this sort of allowed us to triangulate and improve the veracity of the data and the meaningfulness of the information that we gathered. We'll talk later about the model that we developed, the methodological framework that we employed, and the components of the model. Stephen will talk about that more specifically subsequently. And later on, we'll talk briefly about the report. And as I mentioned, we'll address any questions that you have. In the environmental scan, it was very important for us to have a good understanding of the evolving regulatory and political environment, given the fact that the energy sector is under shared jurisdiction. There's federal areas of responsibility, and there's primarily provincial areas of responsibility. So each province has a somewhat different regulatory environment, different competitive structure, different competitive dynamics, and of course different fuel mixes. So a province like Quebec, which is primarily hydro dependent, 93% of its power is generated from hydro, is quite different from other regions that are, some of the regions like Ontario and New Brunswick have a share of their power is derived from nuclear power. And some of the provinces still are using some fossil fuel generated power from coal and from natural gas. So we wanted to have a good understanding. That's really an absolute requirement for this kind of work. As was mentioned previously, Canada has made a pledge to have a net zero electricity sector by 2035 and to completely decarbonize its economy by 2050. This is going to have profound implications for the electricity sector as well as its labor market, and we try to capture that in our forecasting methodology. Also, technological innovations continue to really have significant implications for the sector, its sustainability, efficiency, cost structure, and the services that can be offered. Just things that are notable are things like smart meters, distributed generation, small modular reactors, which could really have a profound effect in the future, and as well as electric vehicles, which I'm sure you're all aware that these are things that are really having a tremendous impact, and the effect will be more pronounced in the years ahead. In the international development, in the international realm, I've already briefly touched upon some of Canada's multilateral commitments in terms of climate change. The relationship between Canada and the US, the bilateral relationship in trade is quite important. Canada exports approximately 1/10 of its electricity to the US. There are significant inner ties between the two countries, and this really enables the US it positions it better to meet its climate change objectives because our electricity sector is much cleaner than theirs overall. I think it's important to also note that the north-south trade in electricity actually exceeds east-west trade between the provinces, which is kind of strange to some people, but in order to really resolve this situation would require tremendous investment in transmission infrastructure. Okay, so in terms of the actual employment in the sector, in the past 5 years, the increase in employment has been quite substantive. The actual increase has been 12% in the past 5 years, and that rate of increase is greater than the actual increase in employment in the overall Canadian economy during the same period. 7% in the overall economy and 12% in the electricity sector. Electricity sector employment rose from 98,750 in 2017 to 110,650 in 2022. And we've noticed anecdotally that online job postings have actually increased exponentially in the past few years. Examples include job postings for wind turbines, which have increased 6.5 times in the past 5 years, and job postings for people working in solar power and electric vehicles has actually increased by 3.5 times in the past 5 years. Another development that we've observed is the dramatic increase in the amount of outsourcing to consultants and contractors that has been taking place in the electricity sector. Julia will be talking about this further. But what we've noticed is that relative to our last major survey, which was in 2017, 16% of firms were outsourcing at that time, and it's more than doubled since then. We have registered 35.5% of the firms surveyed are actually outsourcing currently. So that's a really significant development and one that we will monitor on an ongoing basis. And now I'll turn it over to Julia.
Thank you, Sheldon. And while we are on this slide, the map that you see here actually presents the employment levels in the electricity sector across the different regions of Canada. And we can see that it actually correlates with the population levels in each of those provinces and territories. Now, when we look at the same picture of employment, but from a perspective of lines of business, we can see that about 3/4 of the electricity sector is involved with generation, transmission, and distribution. About 1 in 5 employees in the electricity sector are handling generation from hydro sources. 1 in 6 employees are handling generation from renewable sources. And we have also noticed in our survey that about 1/3 of the organizations have indicated that they are involved in generation from renewable sources, and that was the largest share of organizations. When we look at construction, we can see that it accounts for 10% of the employment levels, and employers have indicated that they expect it to grow at least 6 times in the next 5 years. That is an expectation. However, it could be plausible. We have also seen an increasing number of organizations within the emerging fields of automation, energy storage, and energy efficiency. Now, how do we define the electricity sector? So the 34 occupations that you see here are identified by the industry stakeholders as key to the sector, and they all correspond to a NOC code. And they are divided into occupational groups. We have our trades, which include power line technicians, electricians, millwrights, and they account for the largest occupational group within the core occupations, 27%. We also have our engineers, technicians, and technologists. We have managers and supervisors and ICT professionals. In addition to that, so all of those core occupations, they account for 57% of the sector. In addition to that, we have other occupations. So all of our legal, finance, HR, marketing people, they account for 43% of the employment in the sector. What we don't see here are actually those renewable energy occupations. And as I mentioned earlier, all of these occupations, they correspond to a NOC code. Unfortunately, for renewable energy occupations, wind turbine technicians, wind turbine installers, smart grid specialists, we do not have currently, at the moment, a NOC code. And that makes it much more difficult to analyze the data and hinders the depth and accuracy of our analysis. Now that we've defined the occupational groups, we can look at the diversity picture of the sector. So what we see here, the trend generally has been positive, but there is room for improvement, and it's twofold. The first one is having enough data, sufficient quality data. So it has been identified by the employers, at least 30 to 40% of the employers have signaled that they do not collect data on diversity parameters, with the exception of women. For women, there was almost all of the organizations had that information. The second issue are the numbers themselves. So for women, for instance, what you see here, the donuts represent the distribution of that diversity group across the different occupational groups. And the numbers, the percentage inside the donut represent the shares of that diversity group. For women, for instance, we see 27% employed in the electricity industry. And the comparable figure for that in the wider economy is 48%. So quite a large gap there. And the issue with women is not only that, but it's actually an occupational segregation. We can see here that the gray share in the first donut is actually the largest, and that means that women tend to be occupied within those non-core occupations. They tend to be employed within our legal, finance, HR, and the ones that I've mentioned previously, as well as other managers. So not our utility managers or construction managers or engineering managers. A similar picture could be visible within the indigenous employees. About 2 out of every 3 indigenous employees, they could be found employed as a tradesperson. However, their percentage of representation actually corresponds pretty well to their participation in the labor market generally in the economy. Racialized groups, they account for 22% of the electricity sector versus 33% in the economy, a gap there. Internationally trained workers have a similar picture with 19% in the electricity sector versus 32% in the overall economy. And with internationally trained workers, we also see that occupational segregation, mostly into those engineering and ICT occupations, and that likely has to do with the existing immigrational pathways. So if we would like to increase the share of trades, we need to revisit some of the immigrational pathways that currently are in place. Persons with disabilities, well, we see that about 1% of the electricity sector identify as such. And as of 2021, we know that the figure in the wider economy stands at about 15%. And that gap could be explained partially due to a different definition, so a visible versus non-visible disability. And also, perhaps we suspect that there's an issue of underreporting. Now, when we look at the age profile of the electricity sector, we see that the majority of the workforce is concentrated within the cohort of 25 to 54, which is quite expected. We have also identified that the average retirement age for the electricity sector stands at 60 years of age, and this is 3 years below the national average. That means that the workforce within the electricity sector retires 3 years earlier, and despite that, we still have older on average workforce. And when we look at the age groups of younger versus more mature employees, we can see that the picture is quite unbalanced. So we have, for each younger employee, we have about 3 more mature employees. And that means that within the next 10 years, when those mature employees will be retiring, there will not be enough sufficient workforce to replace them within the existing workforce. That means that we will have to look for other sources of supply. And what other sources of supply could there be? People can transition into the electricity sector from other sectors, construction, manufacturing, mining, so sectors where there is an overlap of skills. And you can refer to our competency framework for more information on that. We could also tap into the underrepresented groups that I've mentioned earlier. I would like to add to that the serving, transitioning, and former military members as a potential pool of labor that you could look into. And just to give an example of how significant diversity is, not just for the way the industry attracts people, but also just in terms of numbers, if we increase the share of women by 10-11% in those core occupations, that would translate into additional 7,000 employees. And as of now, that number might not mean a lot to you, but when Stephen will be presenting some of the outlook numbers, that is quite significant. Now, the majority of the workforce comes from those new labor market entrants. So people who finish their education, and to supplement that, we also have immigration. And with regards to immigration, you can see on the chart here that the number of new permanent residents has been increasing steadily over the past few years, with the exception of COVID, of course. And the plan is to reach almost 500,000 people within the next 3 years annually. And that is a lot of people. We need to make sure that within those people, we have the right skill set to support the electricity sector growth that we are talking about. And we need to make sure that we streamline some of the existing processes in place. We increase the availability of bridging programs. We expedite the process of foreign credential recognition for a quicker integration into the workforce. Now, when we speak about quick integration, that does not necessarily relate to school leavers. Generally, we know that jobs in core occupations tend to be held by people with relatively high level of educational attainment, with about a third having bachelor's degree or higher, and more than 94% having some form of post-secondary education. That means a degree, a diploma, or a certificate. That it translates into 2, 3, 4 years of education. And in addition to that, we have asked our educational institutions, how long would it take you to develop a program in response to electricity sector demand? The response was on average 1 year, but that included also micro-credential, which is shorter, so it could be a more conservative estimate. That takes time to educate the employees before they even reach employment. And what we see here are actually some of the top fields of study that could be found within the electricity sector, with those at the very top have been indicated as the most difficult to recruit and retain. So that is at least according to our survey. And another thing that we can learn from that is actually this multidisciplinarity can create competition within the sector and also with other sectors. But it also shows that it is very difficult to predict one's career pathway based on their field of study. Where we can make that stronger connection is with trades. So, and what we see with new apprenticeship registration is actually a concerning trend of decline. And it's not only with new registrations, but also with completions. Diversity-wise, among trades, we can see that the picture hasn't been changing a lot. So the green portion of the bars represent the female students, and we can see that it has not been changing a lot throughout the last few years. Now, what other trends have we noticed in the last few years? So, as Sheldon mentioned, there has been significant growth in terms of employment levels in the electricity sector, and it has been particularly strong among those core occupations, growing twice as much as the rest of the economy, at 14% versus 7% in the last 5 years. And that is despite the pandemic, highlighting the stability and resilience of the sector. Now, when we break down the same growth by occupational groups, we can see that the majority of that growth was driven mainly by ICT occupations. However, there was a positive trajectory with the rest of the occupational groups. From a geographical point of view, we can see a positive and widespread growth in the electricity sector, the green bars, with BC and Quebec exhibiting the highest growth rate for the core occupations. When we look at other crucial parameters of employment, we know that wages tend to be higher on average in the electricity sector. And however, wage growth has not kept pace with the rest of the economy. And this is the chart that you see on the right. Green represents the electricity sector and the blue outline represents all other sectors. And knowing that in the wider economy, wages have not kept up with inflation, the situation could be a little bit more concerning. With tenure, it tends to be 3 years, on average, 3 years higher than in other sectors. However, we have seen a trend of decline in the last few years, probably due to the fact that younger employees were incoming and replacing those retiring. Similar picture we have noticed also with permanent and full-time employment, where the shares of permanent employment stands at 89%. Shares of full-time employment within the core occupation stands at 99%, so relatively high shares. But once again, we see a trend of decline in the past few years. Turnover rates, they tend to be moderate, with renewable energy occupations exhibiting the highest turnovers, so at 10%. And that also is being supported by the information provided during our key informant interviews, where it has been identified that the nature of those jobs actually create shorter career span for those wind turbine technicians, wind turbine installers, solar panel technicians and installers. And that's why we see, that's what we see from our survey. On that note, handing over to Stephen to present the labor market outlook.
Thank you, Yulia. Indeed. So my job here today is going to walk us through kind of the labor market outlook for the sector, as well as kind of give a little bit more precision in terms of kind of the HR strategy and recommendations needed to take advantage of the opportunities that lie ahead. Again, taking stock of the presentation thus far, I think it's clear that the sector has reached, what I would call an inflection point. The past 5 years have been characterized by strong employment growth. And on the heels of this sort of robust job creation, employers are very optimistic about the future of the sector. When we asked them about their outlook over the next 5 years, a staggering 87% of them see the outlook to 2028 as good or very good. This is, I think, in my opinion, quite remarkable, given that at the time of the survey, so mid-2023, inflation, interest rates, geopolitical tensions, perhaps not unlike what we're seeing today, were foremost on the minds of many businesses, and the risks to a recession were imminent. But still, despite this sort of uncertain and unstable context, when asked about their primary concerns regarding the outlook, the most pressing issue is finding skilled talent. Much of the optimism that we see from employers through the survey, in fact, is due to this transformation that we've been discussing throughout today, which is underway in the sector as it continues to shift towards renewable sources of energy. But against the backdrop of Canada's ambitious goals to reach the net zero electricity grid by 2035 and net zero emissions by 2050, Canada's energy regulator released a report earlier this year that showcases one of the potential paths in terms of the energy mix Canada needs to achieve these goals. So important to note that this is just one path towards those goals. Now, needless to say, as we see in the chart, the path to net zero, not surprisingly, requires a significant shift towards renewable energy. Their report also examined what the energy mix would look like under current measures. So we leverage these two scenarios and the underlying data, along with, as Sheldon mentioned, the development of an in-house employment forecast tool to really kind of better understand and capture the labor market implications of these scenarios for the sector. Leading up to 2023, again, as discussed previously, considerable employment growth that took place in the sector since our last report in 2017. And looking ahead to 2028, the pace of that growth is set to continue under the path to net zero scenario. This is primarily driven by the fact that renewable energy sources, which will grow, tend to in fact be more employment intensive than other energy sources. Also, to note, under the current measures scenario, we anticipate that employment will also increase, but considerably less when compared to the path to net zero going out to 2028. I think it's important to really say that this short-term forecast model only tells part of the picture, and that is the employment growth anticipated from expansion demand. We also need to consider that the sector, as has been mentioned, is older on average than the rest of the economy, and a considerable number of job openings will arise due to retirements or what we consider replacement demand. All told, under the path to net zero scenario, total job openings in the sector over the next 5 years will exceed 27,000, of which 15,000 is a result of replacement demand, so it's those retirees, and the remaining 12 from expansion demand in terms of making efforts towards net zero. Under the current measure scenario, job openings are anticipated to be in the order of 17,000 over the next 5 years, but the bulk of that stems from replacement demand compared to expansion demand. The question really, however, is how difficult will it be for employers to fill these openings? But to answer that question, we sort of break down the outlook into the 4 broad occupational groups as introduced by Yulia that constitute these core set of 34 occupations. Now, for each occupational group, we forecast the total openings anticipated over the 5 years, so expansion and replacement demand, and compare that to the number of anticipated school leavers and job changers. Now, if we sort of take these 2 factors, sort of supply and demand together, for engineers, technologists, technicians, ICT workers, and trades, for 3 big groups, over the 5-year period, openings are expected to exceed the supply of workers. In other words, significant gaps will open up over the period 2023 to 2028. Whereas with respect to managers, in fact, we see that the total openings will be able to be adequately covered by those job leavers, school leavers, and job changers. This quantitative analysis is substantiated by our employer survey results. Overwhelmingly, employers reported either difficulty or extreme difficulty in filling talent needs for each of these categories over the next 5 years. And a closer look in the report at the 34 detailed occupations that make up the 4 broad groups reveals that with few exceptions, all will be confronted with the difficult task of filling the growing number of anticipated openings. We also wanted to sort of better understand kind of the potential long-term talent needs against this sort of changing inflection point, if you will, especially as they relate to our electricity and energy goals of 2035 and 2050. To do so, since we extrapolate out the results from our short-term forecast model, so the relationship between employment and the changing energy mix, also include, for instance, some estimates going forward with respect to demand, and really take that out to 2035 and 2050. This results in some 130,000 new job openings between 2028 and 2050 under the path to net zero, which, when added sort of the previous 27,000 job openings expected over the next 5 years, would sort of bring the total between now and 2050 to over 150,000 openings. I think it's important to highlight, obviously, that producing an outlook to 2035 and 2050 comes with a substantial number of assumptions, caveats, and of course, uncertainties, not the least of which is associated with the length of the time horizon. However, this purpose of this long-term scenario for us is really meant to provide an order of magnitude as to the scale of human resource requirements for the sector as we chart our path to net zero. And leaving large talent needs unfilled, gets kind of mentioned in the introduction, will really compromise our economic, social, and environmental goals and halt, or even worse, reverse the considerable progress that has been made thus far. And the call to action is really a human resource strategy for the sector. With that in mind, our report puts forth a comprehensive strategy focused around 3 broad pillars with some 20 recommendations, all of which will entail coordinated action across multiple stakeholders. The first pillar is attracting and retaining talent and the efforts needed to close labor shortages gap that are anticipated to persist over the coming years. The first recommendation, retaining older workers, not unique to the electricity sector, but the challenges as laid out earlier are particularly acute in the sector, and notably so among some of the occupational groups such as management and ICT. Measures to retain older workers are really about creating opportunities and removing barriers. These can include improving work flexibility, making other workforce adjustments, but also pension rules that don't penalize older workers to stay longer in their job. At the same time, the representation of women in the sector falls noticeably short. Some of this, of course, is due to the low participation among women in the trades, which constitutes a sizable share of the workforce in the sector. But women are systematically underrepresented across the sector at work and in education and training. And through our surveys, both employers and educators reported having promotional campaigns to draw more women to the sector, noticeable increase compared to our survey of 2017. But the improvements over the past 5 years have been modest at best. We really need to flip the script and be more ambitious and go beyond promotional campaigns if we want to have a meaningful impact in this regard going forward. And the report points to a number of ways in which we can do this. The sector's record on diversity with respect to other groups is equally lackluster. Significant strides are needed to improve representation of newcomers, persons with disabilities, Indigenous peoples, and racialized groups. Here too, promotional campaigns dominate the current approach. There is scope to build stronger connections and partnerships with organizations that represent these individuals and an approach that is currently underutilized. In parallel and connected really, is we need to enrich the employment opportunities and open the pathways that enable individuals like the one at the beginning of the presentation to see themselves embarking on a rich career in the sector. All too often, many individuals get segregated into certain types of jobs, which of course reduces the attractiveness of the sector and inevitably limits considerably overall human capital development. The sector also needs to attract more of the anticipated increase in newcomers over the forecast horizon. And here I think it's really key to be proactive. As Canada's immigration system shifts towards one that is based more on skills than qualifications, there's an opportunity here to introduce selection criteria that reflect the labor and skill needs of the electricity sector's workforce. We also need to ensure that the pipeline of future students is reflective of the sector's future needs. Right now, capacity among educational institutions is restricting the future supply of workers. These bottlenecks need to be addressed as part of our broader strategy. Pillar 2 is really about safeguarding work quality in the sector and ensuring that workers have the right skills and training. As Julia mentioned, overall work quality in terms of wages, full-time and permanent status, tenure is quite high in the sector, but there are signs over the past 5 years that it is deteriorating. As competition for talent intensifies across sectors, especially in those core occupations, we must be mindful of safeguarding the quality of work in the sector. Otherwise, the talent shortage is only like to intensify. We also need more succession planning and mentoring programs to facilitate that knowledge transfer and exchange between older and younger workers. Many employers have such programs, but they are often restricted to management-related occupations, whereas we see the issue with respect to older workers much more widespread, and as such, so should these programs. Improved efforts to recognize the skills of newcomers already here will also go a long way to addressing skill shortages. Now, this, of course, is a long-standing issue in Canada and one, again, not unique to the electricity sector, but it nevertheless bears repeating as part of this overall strategy. Employers, in terms of skill needs, have also expressed high value that they place on work-integrated learning and apprenticeships. However, many of them report being unable to take advantage of such programs for lack of capacity. Removing these and working together will unlock the full potential of work-integrated learning approaches. To ensure that skills being provided are those demanded by the sector, greater collaboration between educators and employers are also needed. Again, something that bears worth repeating, but I think what's interesting from our research is that the survey results highlight that partnerships between industry and education fall well short of expectations. The results of the survey, however, do show that there is greater appetite to improve those connections, but once again, time and resources are dampening coordination efforts. Efforts to bring together employers and educational institutions in a more meaningful and structured way will also be needed to bring new training programs online, such as those that I've mentioned before with respect to small modular reactors, energy storage, and many others which are urgently needed. Improved collaboration of this nature, along with addressing capacity constraints, will help to reduce the lead time to start new programs, which is currently far too long. Fostering continued R&D innovation through industry and education will also support the development and deployment and persistence of new technologies that we see emerging in the sector. The final pillar is about building partnerships and connecting workers with new and emerging opportunities. It starts with really recognizing the dramatic shift in work arrangements that have taken place in a post-pandemic world. Competition for talent has increased, especially for work that can be performed remotely. But at the same time, through our conversations with employers, there's tension within the sector and within the workplace. And some of that work cannot be performed remotely. We need to ensure collectively that HR professionals are equipped with the right tools and the evidence base to manage these new challenges. A forthcoming EHRC report will examine these issues in greater detail. We've also seen throughout the report and discussion today emphasis being placed on renewable energy occupations. Here too, important to bear in mind and to repeat, official statistics on the vast majority of these key roles simply does not exist. How can we design effective evidence-based policies and strategies for the electricity sector without good data on renewable energy occupations? Here too, we are working with our partners to close some of these knowledge gaps, but we urgently need high-quality official data on these occupations. There are also significant gaps when it comes to diversity, equity, and inclusion. This will need to change as well if we are going to help organizations foster a more diverse and inclusive work environment. Our survey results in conversations with stakeholders also reveal that within sector competition is high and among one of the major concerns among employers. Working together rather than at cross purposes must be encouraged. Promoting and working together will be key to alleviating talent shortages now and into the future. And as energy projects become increasingly decentralized, we need to encourage the development of more local-based training and education programs that, one, sort of align with the sector needs in that area because they will be diverse, but two, also are able to draw on local talent to fill emerging workforce needs. At the same time, collectively, again, we must be mindful that electricity-related projects cannot be the sole source of regional development. It must be part of a broader regional economic strategy. And more to the point, an integrated approach of this nature will help improve economic resilience, but also have positive spillover effects on the ability of the electricity sector to attract talent to these rural and remote areas. This is an ambitious human resource strategy, but one I think that we feel matches our ambitious economic, social, and environmental goals. EHRC stands ready to support the sector in implementing this action plan, but it will require actors working together if we're going to make meaningful progress. Thank you.
Thank you so much to Julia, Stephen, and Sheldon for the presentation. I've had a front seat view of the tremendous amount of work and dedication that's gone into this work, the assembling of and assessing of the data, and also the presentation that has provided such insightful portrait of our industry. So another resounding round of applause for our economists, please. Not quite off the hook yet, as we enter the question and answer segment. So I'm going to be inviting questions from everyone who's in the room. We have Anna at the back who will be ready with a microphone to take your questions. And for our participants who are joining us remotely or through the webcast, I think there is a question mark symbol on your screen that you can use to type your questions, and we have Amina at the back who will be reading those and getting them ready to be answered by our economists. So, questions. Okay. And if you could just mention your name and your organization as well.
Sure. Teresa Sarkeesian from the Electricity Distributors Association, and thank you so much for this outstanding presentation. So much to digest and take in. I am interested because you had that big number. I guess it's over 150,000 effectively till 2050 in terms of new and replacement jobs across Canada in the electricity sector. Have you done any work to compare that to other sectors, or are we a particular sector that's facing more challenges than average across Canada?
All I can say, sorry, I think it's important to recognize that a large part of that projected increase is directly related to the government's commitments to decarbonize the economy. And it was mentioned earlier that many people anticipate that the generation capacity will need to double or triple in order to facilitate that transition. So I think also the fact that a lot of the transition to renewable energy, it's quite labor intensive, and all the construction of new facilities and equipment is really driving those numbers. So while we have looked at, I can't really quote any other sectors off the top of my head. I know that construction and manufacturing, and other sectors like mining, for example, do similar projections. I think ours is probably a little more pronounced, and the significant growth exceeds those of other sectors because of the ambitious nature of these climate change commitments.
Thank you. Thank you for the report. Very insightful. Really interested in the HR strategies and what we can do to continue to support that. My question is a follow-up to that, and specifically. So, is there a sense in the report, or maybe you can speak to it, where do we see the biggest impact in terms of some of those strategies? So, is there direction in terms of what we should be pursuing on a priority basis, bridging for international workers, flexibility for senior folks, et cetera? So impact.
Stephen, do you want to take a crack at that one?
Sure. I mean, in the report, we do provide a few potential estimates in terms of, as Julia mentioned, what would closing the gap, for instance, with respect to women sort of add in terms of kind of the workforce complement. But I think the main point when I think about addressing labor and skill shortages is let's do everything that we can. When I think about older workers, it is a sizable cohort, so any efforts to extend that retirement age are needed. Similarly, with respect to women, we have 27% right now in the sector compared to 48%. So little progress there would also make a huge difference. All of the other underrepresented groups that we've mentioned will play a key role in that. Racialized groups, newcomers, persons with disabilities, Indigenous peoples. We also need, I think, to continue to draw new school leavers, more school leavers into the sector. And I think within the sector to work collaboratively to draw workers to the sector. So I think it's on the labor side is to do as much as we can with respect to all of them, and to see it really as kind of a comprehensive strategy. And I would say the same thing with respect to skills.
I would add, I agree with Stephen's point, and I believe there's a lot of these things have to be done simultaneously, and a lot of the things that we've recommended in our three-pronged approach, a lot of them have to be there's a great degree of interaction between them. So I think it really requires a collaborative effort and a sense of urgency.
Nina Gokhale, the IESO. Thank you very much. This has been a really insightful presentation. I just had a follow-up question maybe to one of the pieces I noted around the outsourcing of work to contractors and consultants, and that's quite a significant increase in that period of time. I'm curious if there's a sense of, the type of maybe streams of work, the duration of this work. Is that something that we see as sort of an ongoing trend? And whether the talent pool that makes up this contractor consulting population could be potentially the same talent pool that's coming from the workforce that we're trying to increase. So trying to increase the workforce in some of these pockets, could they then move over to some of these consulting opportunities?
Yeah, I would say that for sure that might be the case, and there is also an overlap with other industries and other sectors. And that's why people resort to outsourcing or maybe contracting and consulting. I can mention that the numbers that you've seen are actually the duties that these consultants and contractors perform, and we have seen that they have increased twice as much in the last 5 years. So we see that the the share of the work that is being outsourced is increasing. When we asked employers about their outlook in terms of outsourcing, what do they feel? Will it increase? Will it stay the same? The majority would actually see a mild increase. So that's 1 to 5% approximately. That's the outlook in terms of the future and the sentiment across the employers.
Yeah, I think there's also another component to that. It's sort of the ability to contract and outsource can really expedite the hiring process. A lot of these organizations tend to have internal bureaucracies that mean that you can't quickly get somebody on board rather quickly. You have to go through a competitive process. And the fact that some of these contractors and consultants can make their services readily available and assume some of the risk, some of the liability, professional liability associated with doing that, there's a lot of transactional efficiencies in doing that I think they're taking advantage of, from what we see at least.
Sorry, if I could maybe just add one point to that is, I mean, certainly, in through the survey, there is an element that yes, some contracting is a result of the temporary nature of sort of the work or projects, but at the same time, there's one of the main reasons that is being done sort of through contracting or consulting is that there's difficulty in recruiting talent, right? And so this sort of persistence of the inability to sort of fill job openings sort of leads employers down the path of having to outsource. And so with the shift that we're anticipating to see, unless we're able to sort of make progress on this action plan, then it's likely that we might see greater efforts to sort of outsource to the extent that it's feasible. Because even those outsourcing, obviously, you need to find the talent.
Great. Before I take the next question in person, I just want to check with Amina if there's any questions online.
There aren't any questions quite yet.
Okay, so we'll take your question then.
Yes.
Yeah.
Thank you. Akira Tokuhiro, Ontario Tech University, as a professor now and former dean. Very, very nice to see this report. I guess I have a lot of questions, but I'll ask one. You mentioned urgency, and I often think about the degree programs and the rate at which new degree programs or existing degree programs can change to meet the needs of the labor force. And then non-degree seeking students, do you have additional granularity or details in the different kinds of scenarios with respect to urgency? And you mentioned 2023 to 2032 as one was, I worry about their urgency and the change with respect to degree seeking students currently in universities and colleges and the non-degree seeking young people that are not in degree seeking programs, but that number may be larger, certainly larger than the degree seeking. So because you have degree programs, and if you look at, I have dual citizenship between the US and Canada. If you look at the numbers of mechanical engineers, it's much larger, of course, in larger countries. So you have that competition between North and South as well. So I guess my main question is, when you say urgency, do you have detailed scenarios of a 1%, 2%, or 5%, or 10% growth? Because if you say that it needs to grow 20%, it may not be possible. So it's a long question, sorry, but if you can add a little bit more detail about the urgency and the change that's needed to get to net zero, I would be appreciative. Thank you.
From your perspective, I know like the post-secondary institutions offer quite a wide diversity of certificate, diploma, and degree and applied degree programs that are very tailored. And some of them are working quite vigorously to develop programs in conjunction between, say, colleges and universities that reflect the evolving trade skill requirements of the sector. So from my own observation, I see that they're developing, trying to respond rapidly to the industry's requirements and collaborating more intensively with industry. They have all kinds of industry advisory committees to try to tailor the curriculum as much as possible to the evolving needs of the sector. So I know it's a long-term proposition to develop a new program of study and to market it and to have applicants generate interest among potential applicants. So I know that it does require a lot of initiative, and it can't be done instantaneously, but I think it's important to establish some momentum. That's what I'm really saying in terms of urgency, is just to establish some momentum and build upon that in whatever it has to be done very methodologically and systematically.
I think we have a question. We have a question with Nora? Okay. I think we'll take one more question.
Hi, Helen Viveros with Ontario Power Generation. Thank you very much for this presentation. Thanks for all of the effort. This has been fantastic. But my question revolves around, there was a statistic that you had indicated around skilled trades apprentices, and that there's fewer skilled trades apprentices that are going into the electricity industry. And I found that really interesting. I mean, obviously, OPG, like many in the sector, lots of growth, lots of construction projects. We rely very heavily on our skilled trades workforce. So wondering if you have any additional details or color that you can paint into that statistic around why that is, and why we're seeing fewer apprentices going into the electricity sector.
Mm-hmm. So I think what we have shown here is actually a decline in new registrations, and the same trend has actually been persistent within the completions of apprenticeships. And we think that it could be due to the pandemic effect, and actually apprenticeships and trades require in-class education. So it could be a shift in preferences, and also the limitation of going into classroom and actually doing all the studies there. Have created this reduced actually demand for those apprenticeships and trades. So that's our hypothesis regarding that, but yeah. Would you?
I have nothing to add.
Okay.
Sorry.
All right. Thank you so much for your questions, and thank you again to Yulia, Stephen, and Sheldon for the presentation and addressing the questions that have resulted. So in our goal, as always at EHRC, is to develop practical, effective solutions to the industry challenges, and to do that, we always emphasize the continuous engagement with industry. And I'd like to acknowledge our steering committee, who have been our guidance throughout this process, a very highly engaged group of sector individuals, employers, educators, labor, industry associations, who have been holding our hand really throughout this process. We've been also very fortunate to have a very high participation rate with our surveys, so we would like to thank all the employers again and educators in the sector who have engaged in that part of the research. We're very excited about the discussions and engagements that will come from this study, the workforce planning gaps that it will plug, and hopefully the sector-wide actions that it will galvanate. Next, I'd like to invite Nirav Patel, who is the Director of Human Resources at Atura Power, and who is also our incoming chair of the EHRC board, to provide some closing remarks.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thanks, Sandiswa. So there's a lot to unpack in today's LMI report. And as you've heard, for those of us working in the industry, it's anything but usual times. Transformation is no longer something that we're looking at in the future. We're in the thick of things already. So the LMI findings provide the evidence that you need to communicate a plan for change, to ensure that our most important asset, our highly knowledgeable and motivated people, are acknowledged as such. Some key messages that I heard today that nearly knocked me off my chair. By 2028, we expect 28,000 plus job openings to meet the rising demands of our electricity sector. That's big. We have a real opportunity right now. Strengthening employer and education partnerships will continue to be one of our strongest mechanisms to ensure jobs and skills align. And collaboration with governments will continue to be essential as we improve employer access to workers with in-skill demands. Due to the size of the sector, StatsCan data does have some limitations in terms of granularity, and particular in capturing detailed information on specific occupations, sectors, gender, and age within the electricity sector. And there are no NOC codes defined for renewable energy occupations such as a wind turbine technician. I think that's a real opportunity for us, because I can count on my fingers about 3 new occupations that the electricity sector specific to Atura Power and OPG would be looking at in the future. So diversity must be a key for this sector to find the resources that we need to ensure our industry is reflective of Canadian society. And yes, while some progress has been made, it's been slower than we would like to all see. I'm sure you'll agree with that. The business case has been proven, and EHRC are proud to be leading the change through our leadership accord on DEI. Please see me or others on our board if you're interested in learning more about that and joining. But as we heard today, data gaps still exist and hinder the path for depth and accuracy of electricity labor market data analysis. And DEI data is not being tracked by many employers, so that's really another opportunity we have as a sector. And we as an industry must tell the story of this sector to the next generation. We must increase the number of youth being attracted to the sector. And one stat that I didn't specifically hear in the report, but Michelle, you shared with me, the population that we need to look at right now are the people that are going to be starting in the workforce in 2035. So those are the children and the kids and the youth that are in grade 9. What an opportunity we have to talk about STEM and skilled trades and some of the roles that we have available in the electricity sector. So we need to be seen as exciting and technology forward, and a place that people want to start their careers or even begin as mid-year career professionals. Work integrated learning will also be an opportunity for us to introduce the sector as a viable area to start a career or to expand a career and help new entrants into the sector chart a career path. I'm proud to say that EHRC has already put almost 3,000 students into jobs into the electricity sector through co-op and internship programs, many of whom are fodder for full-time regular positions, and many of whom I know in the organizations that I've supported continue to be a source of talent for us. So the risks of inaction, of business as usual, we will still see negative impacts on our productivity, safety, and the ability to ensure reliability and resilience to our grid and the Canadian economy, and I know we won't remain stagnant. The essential information gathered through this study is a call to action for all of us in this room. There is a role for decision makers within industry, government, labor, and education. The data will inform decision-making in workforce planning, in needs analysis, in identifying training requirements, and mitigating business risk related to human capital management. It will brief regulators and other stakeholders on issues, costs, and initiatives for HR development. Finally, it'll inform educators and job seekers about opportunities in the sector and inform government policymakers on labor market conditions and HR priorities. I think this report has something for everyone, including our unions as well, who are a key stakeholder and will look at this to determine what labor strategies we need to work together with industry on to ensure that we have a viable workforce. So the report will be available on EHRC's website. The link will be presented on the screen very shortly. And please stay tuned for regional reports, which will be released in December around the 10th. And as we bring today's event to a close, thank you for your time, for being with us here today for this launch. EHRC plays a leadership role in skills development for our sector. We'll continue to seek out best practices, develop innovative programs based on evidence-based research, and provide commentary on HR issues that impact the electricity sector every day. So that's our commitment to you as EHRC. I encourage you to visit the website, ehrc.ca, for more details on both the report and the organization. And again, if you're interested in being a member, we're here to support as well. I'd like to thank our sponsors, so OPG, thank you for your partnership, ATCO, the Government of Canada, and of course, Michelle and her team, and especially Sandiswa for project leading this initiative, so thank you. And please continue to work safely, everybody. Thank you.